There we go. Good day, everyone. I hope everyone's having a wonderful day where you are. We've got just a wonderful fall day here, what seems to be a fall week in southern Ontario. So certainly in this part of the world, at least harvest is actually looking like it may happen in the next few weeks, which is certainly something that's got a lot of farmers here quite happy. As Heather mentioned, we're going to talk agriculture advocacy today. And, it's one of those things that we get into situations, as she mentioned, where we really have some great thoughts after the fact. And maybe that's on social media when we see some comments. Maybe it's having some conversations, whatever that can be. It really is about how can we be a little bit more confident going into these conversations and being more proactive to it as well, because really, agriculture advocacy is about being proactive and being part of conversations ahead of time, not necessarily always fighting fires when we see some negative videos or negative press or whatever that is. We want to build the confidence of Canadians in the food system and of farmers and of the agriculture industry as a whole, so that a lot of that, becomes non-news before it even happens. So that's what we're going to do today. We've got a few different sections as we go on throughout this. As Heather mentioned, if you have questions, put those into the Q&A section. I will do my absolute best to keep an eye on that if I can. If not, then I know that Heather or the team at Farm Management Canada, they're going to add it into a separate box that hopefully flashes up for me as well if you do have an important question that you'd like to be a part of. Oh, it's even bigger now, so I can see you. So hopefully we'll keep track of the Q&A as we go through today's presentation. So what we're going to start with is really start thinking about what consumers think, because a lot of this comes down to giving the consumer the information that they want or that they need. One of the things that we have to get to understand in this industry is one that we've struggled with for a long time, and that is that to the consumer, the facts do not matter. The perception of the facts is really all that matters to the consumer. And those two things are very, very different things. When we think about facts, there's a lot of research and science out there to support pretty much every agriculture practice that exists today. The challenge, of course, is that, we're fighting fires because there are questions about whether those practices are right or wrong, and science doesn't really enter into the conversation. It's all about the perception from the consumer standpoint about what's going on. And I want to give you an example. Going back a few months ago, this was one of the last, big flash videos that came out. This one was from Mercy for Animals that showed some videos that came from a farm in Abbotsford, BC, and it made lots of national news and was all over the internet and things about abuse that was taking place on a dairy farm there. So, then you get to this case of the fact that by far the majority of dairy farms would not tolerate or would not have any type of this abuse on their farm. That fact doesn't matter. The fact that it made the news and got all over social media is what matters, because then it changes the perception from the consumer standpoint, because they see one case and all of a sudden their perception changes about the industry and then ultimately about a product that they're buying. And it comes in, this was a quote that came from CTV News website. And this lady is part of Mercy for Animals and was part of the PR team that was promoting this video. And she said that, we have no way of knowing if this animal cruelty is running rampant on other factory farms. So when we talk about perception, even words and phrases can have a huge impact on what a consumer starts to think and feel and all of that. And factory farm is one of those terms. And she goes on, which means that consumers have no way of knowing if they're drinking a little bit of cruelty in every glass of milk. That's a tough sentence to combat when we start talking about agriculture advocacy. Because if a person comes up to you as, in this case, a dairy farmer, and says, how can I be assured that there is no cruelty in any glass of milk, that this doesn't happen anywhere else and will never happen again, as a farmer, that's a really challenging question, because the truth is, I haven't met the 12,000 dairy farms that are out there. I haven't toured every one. I can't be sure. I know that the majority are, some of the best farms and do a great job in what they're doing. The challenge is that if another video came out down the road, then what do we do? How do we address that then? And so when we think about, how a consumer starts to perceive, what they're eating and farm production practices, this can have a big impact. So I want you to think through as we go on through the day, and I'm going to bring this up a number of times, that in this industry, we've got the facts to support it. We've got the facts to say that, there's a lot of farms that look like this, or, look like this, but this isn't necessarily the perception that always gets out, because we can, talk lots of this or have this on our farms and know in ourselves that this is what goes on. But then, it only takes one video or one photo, and it can set us back or change the perception of people. So if a consumer looks at a picture, for instance, like this, what do you think goes through a consumer's mind? What questions are going to come up when they see something like that, even if, as a farmer, I have never seen this in real life, ever. But that doesn't matter. The fact is, it happened somewhere, and so the perception changes. You look at something like this, when we talk about crops, biotechnology, pesticides, there's a lot of those issues, and we're going to talk through some of those tough issues a little later on. But, all it takes, the perception of a photo like this, is a team coming in with hazmat suits. They could do that on any farm in Canada. It doesn't matter. I don't know if that's genetically modified for sure. I have no way of knowing. But the perception is that it is, and the perception, because they're wearing those suits and gloves and goggles and masks and all kinds of things, is that it's somehow dangerous. Think through, how a consumer might perceive something like this, and ultimately, how is it actually going to start impacting, their buying decisions? One of the big things that has really made a lot of this such an important issue, because these conversations and these people who, and I call them activists or, anti-groups, they've been around for far longer than, social media has existed. It's just given them a far bigger stage to present some of these ideas. Here's an author who, just based on the information that came through the tweet, appeared as though the Twitter user was sitting in a speech that this author, David Perlmutter, was giving. And he's quoted there as saying, "Gluten is our generation's tobacco." And, the reason that I use it here too is that the author then retweeted, almost reaffirming that yes, in fact, he said that, he believes that. And so we've got a group of people that, can even start changing it through, just different ideas and trying to compare it to other things. Gluten, for most people, they don't even know what it is. If you opened another tab right now, and I did it this morning just to make sure it would still do it, that I just opened up Google and I typed is, what is? And there are about 5 results that come up. What is my IP is obviously the most popular question that people ask. What is ALS? What is Ebola? And number 4 is, what is gluten? So people in this, huge, enormous crave to go gluten-free are going to the internet to give themselves advice and start, figuring out more information, which is fine that they're going online to look for some of these things. But if you actually go through and type is, what is gluten? Google isn't really good at determining what is fact and what is fiction. And so, when you do that, the results that I came up with were 6 reasons why gluten might be bad, which, we tend to be drawn sometimes to things like that, oh, why is it bad? I better click on that to see if it is something dangerous that I shouldn't be using. Other results just were, why is gluten bad? There were some good results too, but there's no way of really determining for a consumer, what this looks like. So we have to think through how they're also getting their information and how other groups are feeding them information. Keeping in mind that they're really trying to do the same thing. Any group that is against, certain production practices or certain foods or, certain anything are really just trying to change the perception that a consumer has so that then they can go ahead and hopefully change buying habits. So what are activists doing? We're going to go through, a few things that how activists do it, and then how groups within the agriculture industry use social media. And that's one of the areas that we're going to start with. And then, as I said, we've got a few other components as we do go on through this presentation that look at, what are some of the tough issues, how can we address some of these tough issues, and things that we have to just at least be aware of. So when we think about what activists are doing, the things that they do really, really well, and it's hard not to give them credit because they're so good at what they do. They play with emotions. Basically, things that you see, posts that you use are all about trying to, get some kind of an impact in a person. Can we get an impact, that maybe people are thinking through things a little bit more? Can we kind of, knock at the heart a little bit? Can we wrench the gut? If an activist posts something that, especially tugs at the heart or or wrenches the gut, then, they have a huge win. And so what they do is they primarily, when we talk about crop production, any group that's against certain practices in crop production uses fear about it. Fear of especially the unknown. The unknown about, what the long-term effects of GMOs might be, despite being, now about 3 decades in use and research. Or what is the long-term effect or the environmental effect of, chemicals and, creating, certain words that have those negative thoughts, like chemicals and synthetic and things like that. When we look at livestock, guilt is the primary fear that you can attach to a lot of the content that activists push out. So, how can we guilt a consumer into thinking negatively about consuming an animal product? And we're going to do that through, reminding it that it was, a live animal at one time. And, they'll go on to further into, live being and, try to connect it as close to a pet or even a person if they can. And then, those animals that, aren't killed for use, we're thinking dairy and eggs specifically, how is their life impacted by, us as humans and our use? And that's where we get a lot of these cruelty videos coming out, is how can we try to guilt the consumer into switching products away from these? And that's really what they want to do, because if they can build that emotional response, it's not necessarily going to have an impact today based on a video. And we go back to that case in BC of that video, it's not going to be a case of everybody who saw that video and went, oh, that's not good. Not all of them went off of dairy. But if that continues to happen over and over and over again, we're going to lose customers on a slow basis here as they change behavior and ultimately change their buying habits, move their money to other products. So that's how they do it. The good news for us, and this comes from an analysis that looks at how, using social media, do people share information. The good news is that a lot of those negative emotions that are tied, in a lot of cases, to activism don't get shared as much as we probably think they do. We tend to seek out that kind of information, so think it's everywhere. It's probably not shared very much. The good news is that when we start talking about the message that we have to share, some of the positives about farming, some of the positives about what we do as farmers, farm families, farm industry, is that people are much more open to seeing and sharing and enjoying content that brings about that, that awe in people, that laughter, that amusement, that joy, a lot more positive emotions. So one thing that I'm going to talk about a pile today is about ensuring that our message is positive. I think this is one area that we can have a big impact and, really make sure that people know that there is a difference between a debate and a conversation. We're open to conversations, not he said, she said, they're bad, kind of, making it as negative as we can, as activists tend to do. We want to have some positive conversations and give consumers the information they want. And this, to me, is, is really a testament to the fact that this is going to be possible. When we look at some of the agriculture groups that are using social media, I didn't include the pictures in the presentation, but the links there if you do want to go check some of these out. There's certainly some of my favorite sites that we look on when we look at social media. Starting with Facebook, one of the ones that I look at a lot is from the Dairy Farmers of Canada, and the reason I use them is that, to my knowledge, and I haven't been corrected in the year or two that I've been using this, is that of all the ag associations, farmer associations, this is the most popular Facebook page. So, when we think about, in my mind anyway, what that means is that it has the most number of likes on Facebook. The most number of people have said, yes, they want to receive information from this organization. They stand at about 43,000 likes, which is really an incredible number when we look at, promoting, farm awareness and farm production. The reason they're so successful in my mind, one is positive messages. And that comes through the posts that they do. It also comes through, there is quite a bit of blasting on there in the comment section or in posts by other people from that activist community coming in and saying, this is terrible, this is wrong, this is what it should be, so on and so forth. The Dairy Farmers of Canada, the people leading this, don't go back and have a debate about this and fight with them on this page. They keep everything as positive as they can. And they know in a lot of cases when that conversation is a useless conversation to have. On social media, there comes a time when it is best to just walk away. And sometimes that includes just, a peaceful exit, saying it's time to, head to the barn, head to the field, head to the shed, whatever it may be. Thanks for the conversation, and walk out. And in some cases, it's just exiting the conversation. There are people out there that are not interested in any type of dialogue at all. They have their minds made up, right or wrong, and that's what they're going to do. One of the things that Dairy Farmers of Canada does really well is feed them that information. So, we see in a lot of cases, recipes as one of the big things. People want, some good recipes that they can take home. And if you look through the page, even how they're promoted, people want something that's very quick, easy to prepare, something that they can, make in just a few minutes and then be off to their next event. They include that type of information. If you get closer to the weekend, you'll see some of that content change a little bit, and it'll be a little bit more on, how are we hosting parties? Maybe you have more time on Saturday to prepare that family dinner. Here's a recipe that, yes, it's going to take longer, but it's, probably the recipe that you're more interested in, maybe on a Saturday or a Sunday evening, compared to, what you may be looking for lunches on Wednesday or back to school or, summertime treats or things like that. So it's really about feeding people information that they are interested in, not that we think they want to know about, but that, are tied somehow to what they're interested in. And so, a big part of that comes to the fact that it is very consumer focused. One of the other challenges we have in the industry is that, we've almost got two languages that we use. We've got one language in one hand that is really meant for within the industry. It's got lots of, fancy lingo and terms and definitions that only people in the ag community understand and know about. But we use it a lot, which can be really challenging and can almost turn off a consumer. as to some of the things that they're that they're reading or seeing or things like that. So it really comes down to making sure that the consumer understands and knows what is going on, and keeping a lot of that information consumer focused. Moving on to a Twitter page. One that's pretty easy to use, especially given the supporter of this presentation is Ag More Than Ever's campaign and their Twitter page. They've got somewhere in that 7,000 followers range, which is a huge number within the ag community. They're having conversations on social media. When people share things with them, they share it back with other people. It's not necessarily about just using your own content you've created. What other things have you found on social media that interest you? If it interests you and you've went, oh, that's a great post, or that's a great article, or that's a great picture, whatever it may be, other people are going to find that as well. And so, it's important, and Ag More Than Ever does it really well at, sharing some of that stuff and having conversations. When people ask you questions, be there with answers when you can be. The other thing that social media is really good at, and something that you need to be aware of, is on the picture and video side. Posts, and there's a pile of research that backs this up as well, is that we've got posts that are just text-based, and that's all, or we've got posts that include pictures and videos, audio in some cases to a lesser extent, but there as well. Those ones that contain that multimedia focus to it, or at least that element to it, are there and are likely going to be shared more. And that's just one of the things that people respond better to the pictures and videos than they do just a simple sentence or a paragraph or however you may go about sharing it. And then the other thing that Ag More Than Ever always does, and the one that I keep bringing up, is being positive about what they're doing. Instagram's another one. Instagram is, one of the newer social media tools, a little bit younger than, certainly Facebook and Twitter as well. This farmer is from the UK, and Mr. Hole has an incredible following on the picture sharing platform Instagram. He's got somewhere in the neighborhood, my last check was 91,000 followers. And he just posts pictures about, things around the farm. Things about, he's got sheep, he's got cattle, they grow grain, things about, the herding dogs or the cows on pasture or picking up straw bales or whatever it is. Part of it, it's beautiful scenery where he's at. But part of it, I think, is that, there's constant updates to it. The photos are always good photos that he uses, but he does continue to add updates at least, usually once or twice a day, which is important in social media, rather than, posting, one or two things a month. It's always positive again. There's explanations in it too, which is helpful. You're almost educating a consumer without them necessarily realizing it. They're going to be attracted to that picture because it's such a great picture, but then they're also going to learn something about, how close that might be to harvest. And, and another word that I couldn't help but use, but is almost hard to explain, but they're very real pictures. And maybe that comes more from the farm perspective than anything, is that we're seeing in a lot of cases, pictures that, as I'm looking at, Mr. Hole's Instagram, I encourage you to go to the site and just see, things that you see around the farm probably have a lot more meaning than you really realize. And it's one thing that I've realized over the last year or two is, we get to experience some of nature's most beautiful times of day and seasons and, elements. Why not share that? And it only takes, a couple of minutes to stop and take a picture and then post it to whatever platform you'd like to do. And this farmer, Benjamin Hole, is really quite good at it. The other thing we can do is, use blogs. All of these social media tools, one of their weaknesses is that we're only dealing in sentences or one picture or things like that. There's no time to get into, a little more in-depth explanation. This Dinner Starts Here website is a group of us young farmers have started it. If you go to the page now, we're experiencing a little technical difficulty ourselves in posting and keeping it, but we're working hard to make sure that this project does last for hopefully as long as it can. The elements that we try to achieve, again, are staying positive and all the things. Using really simple terms and keeping it as simple as we can, at the same time as going into a little bit more depth. So when a consumer asks, what does a hen eat? That's really hard to explain in one tweet on Twitter. We have room to still use simple information in simple terms, but have a little more room to go into a little more detail on a platform like this. So a blog could bring that common themes through those examples. Staying positive is the biggest one. And I sound like a broken record, and you're probably tired of hearing the word already, but I can't stress it enough that we really, as farmers, we have tough days. Livestock dies, crops fail, weather doesn't treat us all that well. Whatever the reason, negativity really is not interesting to a consumer. We can hold out and we can be the positive element, and I think they're going to be far more open to staying with us and having a dialogue with us if we continue to be positive. At the same time, I think we still have to be honest and open, about those bad days or about those things that, maybe to them are somewhat questionable. How can we still have a conversation about, going through, the positives and negatives of maybe a particular production practice? Take, for example, spraying a pesticide on a crop. There are pros and cons to that, but ensuring that the consumer realizes what those pros are and why it is. We don't do it for fun, or we don't do it to wreck the environment, or we don't do it for, all the elements that other people would lead them to believe. We do it for real reasons. And, we need to be open and honest about that. We also need to be open to a dialogue. I'm always fascinated by the questions that people come to me with. And, you wonder a little bit about where they come from. But I think, most people are really intelligent people. They just want to know. I always question society as a whole a little bit when we get into some of these, group settings, or, who can yell the loudest. But, individuals are open to learning. They're open to hearing what you have to say. They're open to understanding. It just takes that little bit of time to help them through that dialogue. And it takes a conversation, and it takes you to be ready to answer questions and not treat them like an idiot. People don't like being treated that way. I don't like being treated that way. It's certainly something that you have to be aware of, and you'll want to try to work towards. And you also want to give people information they want as well. It's not necessarily about the information that we think they want, again. It's about information that they actually want to know about. The answers that we have don't always line up with the questions that they have. We need to think through about, about what questions we are answering, and using examples that we have. We've all been asked questions before, and some of them surprise us and say, well, why would someone have that question? But chances are a lot of people have that question if one person asks. So, think about, how you might answer that at a different time. And use, there's plenty of social media tools out there to help us achieve that. So thinking through some of that, we want to go back and kind of get into the consumer's mind so that we can have these tough conversations. Because one of the things, certainly that I believe is that, we have to be on the same page with them as we have this conversation. So looking at this, we'll look at, as an example anyway, in the livestock production realm, this idea, I first saw a number of years ago from Crystal Mackay at Farm and Food Care here in Ontario. She asked the audience in a presentation she gave, how much money would you spend to save a pet dog, for instance? being in a room full of farmers, that dollar figure is lower than probably what it would be if you were, in Toronto or in another urban environment, where pets really fall closer to the realm of animal rights. And when I talk about animal rights, I'm meaning that animals have really cannot be used for human purposes whatsoever. They should have every right that we as humans have, and basically they're on equal ground with us as people. Then we go to the animal welfare side, which is a little further down the line, which is where most farmers would fit into, that animals can be used for human purposes, whether that be fiber, whether that be nutrition, whatever it may be. But, we have to treat them well. We have to treat them with respect. They have needs that we have to provide for them. There's care that we need to provide for them. That's a really important difference, in a consumer's mind, or at least in our mind, and we have to see where consumers fit on that. Of course, if you go further down the line, you get into that animals, mean nothing to a person, that they can be used however, a person deems necessary and don't need to be treated well and anything like that. That there's no place for that in today's society, and there's no place for that on farms. So as farms, we need to make sure that our fellow producers are on the same page in that welfare side. So then we look at different animals and we start thinking about, so a dog, we may spend, maybe you spend $500, maybe you spend $1,000 on, keeping that dog healthy if it ever got sick. Would any person ever spend that kind of money, saving a tuna fish? Probably not. But it still is the conversation, and still is something that, consumers don't necessarily think through, but that we have to be aware exists. Because from the activist side, when they have those conversations, they're trying to pull all those animals into that right side. Whereas, we need to make sure that the conversations we're having are driving people to that welfare side. And it really is, when we talk about animal production, it's important to make sure that that difference is, what comes to your mind. You look at this and really, we not being able to see much of the pig, there probably is nothing wrong with this photo. That pig is being transported in a pot trailer. From a farm standpoint, it might not be the best idea for us to snap that photo and talk about, and bring up basically what the perception of a consumer might be. Because here, what words come to mind when you do see that picture? In my mind, obviously, with the darkness in behind, you think darkness, you think loneliness with something like that. Maybe cramped because there's, we know what a pot looks like, but most people don't. So, what does that look like? Probably small, instead of what it really looks like. So, when we're starting these conversations, is the conversation best to start with this or with this? You have to be aware of what that consumer thinks, again, between this or this. It's something really important that you do want to think through. Then you think through something like this. So here's another conversation that might come up. What's wrong with a picture like this? I believe it comes from somewhere down on the plains of the US. Chances are nothing's wrong with it either. Here we've got just a large farm that, some people are going to push to that, kind of factory farm edge. Probably they'll push environmental degradation. They'll push, animal cruelty. They'll push all kinds of ideas behind it, despite the probable fact behind it that, you can't run an operation like that simply treating the environment like crap, because you're not going to be around very long. And most farmers know that situation, that you don't treat the area around you, or the area around you isn't going to be any good for you in the coming years. The positives of something like this, if this ever comes up, is, you know, what's the affordability of meat? You know, there are a lot of people in our society that I think when we have these conversations are left out, you know, thinking that it's okay to charge whatever, put whatever rule and regulation in place that we can to ensure that the animal is treated like a dog or a puppy or whatever it may be, when in reality the cost of that becomes prohibitive, and then we drive, you know, the poorer folks of society away from a really nutritious product. And so, you know, you have to be ready to have the conversation about what are the positives if this is brought up about a situation like this. And, you know, maybe it's a case of, you know, I'm not necessarily a big fan of talking on, you know, what this farmer thinks, even though I don't know this farmer or where the farm is, but using your own experiences on your farm about what works, you know, talking about, you know, the importance of caring for the environment around you, caring for the animals, because, you know, anybody in the livestock industry can tell you that a comfortable, happy animal is going to perform better for you. So, you know, being prepared for conversations like this is important. And again, just a couple of examples of realizing, you know, that there's always going to be that other side that's going to make this as black and white of an issue as we can. You know, they're going to look at this picture and then pretty close put on, you know, the picture with that young child, you know, it appears, you know, starving, you know, lack of nutrition, holding up a sign. I'm assuming this is not real. I don't think they would have found this kid somewhere having a protest on their own. But the sign typed up, factory farm cows rarely go hungry. And so they're trying to make this a very black and white issue, whereas we all know that feeding the world is an incredibly complex business. And so we have to bring people to reality and pull them away from one is good and one is bad. And I think, again, going back to being positive, always talking about the positive side of that can try to eliminate that divide that somehow has been created. But the warning that I always have to include is that just because you think it should be posted on social media that moment isn't necessarily always a good idea. Realizing that when you post something online, whether it be a picture, whether it be you know, text-based, whatever it may be, you know, you're going to have some pretty big challenges if the perception comes back fairly negative. So, you know, when we think about this, what I want you to do before you post anything online that deals with advocacy, actually deals with probably anything in your life, is pause before you hit the enter button or the send button or the tweet button or the post button or whatever it is. Just pause for 5 or 10 seconds and think through what that perception is going to be. Is this positive or negative? How are people going to look at this and think about this? You know, what is really going to happen if I post this? You know, there's lots of times that I do post something and, you know, I at least type it up and I look back and I say, you know, the wording in that, the perception just, you know, that sarcastic tone maybe comes out of it that I don't want, or, you know, whatever it may be. You know, I sit back and I think, okay, I'm gonna pause for a little while and I'm gonna rethink that text to make sure that the tone or the words that I use are correct. And I think it's an important step to take through the process. So social media is one element, and we're going to come back to social media in a little while. But, you know, there are a lot of ways to have these conversations in other places. You know, we've all been in schools or classrooms or somewhere, you know, in large settings like this, where the person up at the front says something that we know isn't right. I spoke this summer to, you know, a number of, through a few different shows, livestock shows. They had a learning session, and I spoke to a number of high school and university kids about, you know, how they can have some of these positive conversations in the classroom. And one of the things that stunned me that came back was that they hear a lot about, you know, agriculture in geography class. And, you know, it seemed to maybe come back from, you know, looking at soils and maybe the concern of soil degradation or whatever it may be, but that certain teachers in certain settings were, stating things that were not true. And since then, I've heard lots of conversations about teachers that have an impact on food and things like that. How can we actually have an impact on that conversation? Because if we say, that's not right in our own heads, and then say, we'll walk out of the room and not worry about it because I'm not going to have to worry about that person again, really, we haven't done anything, because that person at the front of the room is going to go on and is going to keep spreading whatever that thought is. What about pausing after it, not interrupting, not yelling, not being negative, at some point when the opportunity presents itself, going up and saying, I have some concerns, or I have some opposing views, or however you want to phrase it, about what you've said. Here's my experience. You're welcome to see pictures. We're welcome to have a conversation. We're welcome to, come to our farm and see for yourself, whatever it may be, to, see the other side of whatever that view that's being presented is. So I think it's important to think through in that classroom setting. This is more than about just, simply posting, but it's being involved in the conversation and being part of it when we see something that we know isn't right. Sarah here has decided that she's going to volunteer for an organization that does farm and food education. Is there an opportunity for you to go to a trade show, to a fair, to whatever it may be? And maybe it's a case of, there's not an ag in the classroom program at your local fair or at a local event that you could say, what, I could round up, 10 different animals and 10 different speakers, and we could have kids go around a circle and, get presented with different elements of food and farm production. That can go a long way in, presenting some of that advocacy side of things. Maybe you're not comfortable with this and this isn't for you, that's fine. But, if you are comfortable in those settings, maybe think that through. One of the local cattlemen's groups every year puts a booth in the home and garden show. And they get set up, they want to get set up, and they get set up in the barbecue section. So people are thinking they're buying barbecues, they're laying out their backyard in a new renovation, whatever it may be. And then here's the Cattlemen's Association promoting local farmers and local beef as something that the first thing that they want to go on that grill. That is incredible advocacy, because it's at an event that consumers are at, and it's information that consumers, all of a sudden think, oh yeah, what am I going to cook with my brand new barbecue? Having that opportunity there can have some really positive impact. And then, this comes from the Royal, but it really focuses on the youth in the industry and our kids and, neighbors and whatever it may be. And, I really think we need to focus on making sure that they're given all the information that they can be provided with as well. And we need to sit down with our kids and talk out some of these conversations. One, you're going to probably learn a little bit from each other about, what maybe some of the opinions might be of your generation versus their generation, some of the things that they may hear versus you may hear. And it's going to give you practice in having that conversation. Maybe it's an exercise you can do, and exercise doesn't sound fun, but maybe you can have a fun discussion around the dinner table with the family or friends or whatever it is about some of these really tough issues. And even if everybody around the table shares the same opinion, maybe you can all get better at developing responses or hearing how people have reacted to specific conversations. So what are those conversations that you can have? Here are, the questions that I tend to see or get the most. What I do is I actually keep a list of some of the most popular questions so that when I have time, I can start thinking through, some of these things. Dehorning, for instance, is one question that comes up in the dairy industry. In the beef industry, it's, corn-fed or grain-fed cows, animals kept indoors versus, free range, antibiotic use, hormones for meat, for milk, for egg production. People have all sorts of beliefs. What are GMOs, pesticide use, how are sow stalls used, what are layer cages? What are some of those conversations that you have? And, answering some of these tough conversations, a lot of it comes back to, when we started this off, we said, you always have that really good response after the fact. This is about being prepared for that question before it even comes, or learning from that. Because if you get the question once, chances are you're going to get at least a variation of that question later on. So how can you get the information that you need to be able to adequately answer this? A lot of it comes from your own personal experiences, and a lot of it needs to come from your own personal experiences. You do not want to be going and talking on behalf of farm production practices that you don't have any experience in, because you can be caught if the information you get is a little off. So, you really need to be prepared for some of that things. Then when you look at this, you want to think through, what are some of that dinner conversation that maybe you have with your family or friends, share some of those other questions that you've got. Be prepared for that. Maybe you've got lots of tractor driving time. Maybe you're on the road, in the industry selling or researching or whatever it is. You've got that spare time as you go. Have conversations with the people beside you, or even within your own head, about how you might answer some of these questions if you're asked that. It's kind of a funny practice that I tend to do quite a bit, especially around the barn and in the field. And it's amazing, how you do, kind of think through, and even think through your choice of words. Understanding, that certain words that you use are going to bring about certain perceptions in a consumer. What are the adjectives you're using? How can you maintain that positive response? And, what is your go-to response if the conversation heads south? Because you're bound to get into those where you get talking to someone who is not interested in having a conversation. So what you need to do is you need to think through what is basically your exit strategy for something like that. The other thing that you need to think through is, kind of these questions, and these are becoming more and more popular questions as well, is these, which is better type questions. And your response, because you probably look at that and you kind of see where you fit, your response cannot be, I am better than the other person because. We need to make sure that, we respect that consumers have different choices in the food marketplace. We just need to educate them about what those differences might be. That's what when they ask which is better, they're really asking, what is the difference? And so you can go in and talk about, what are the differences between conventional and organic, and not necessarily, for myself, we fall under the conventional farm. I don't talk about, everything that an organic producer does, because I don't know that, but I talk about what we do and why we do the different things that we do. Not because it's better than somebody else, but because it's different. And then the consumer can make up on their own terms and their own mind what, kind of where they fall under. And the same goes for, any conversation about, even local versus imported. I think it's tough for us to say that we are, it's great for us to promote, for instance, a Canadian product. I think that's important that we promote, how to find Canadian product or our other product, but it's not necessarily that we're trashing, a product that's imported from California. That product from California can still be a perfectly good product. It's just a different one. So let's talk about the positives about why somebody might buy local, or why somebody at least might buy domestic. These are some of the challenges that I think we do face in a lot of these conversations is getting away from that better or worse, as the activists do it, trying to separate the black or white, because we're just going to get in a bigger mess, I think. I think it's talking about what we're comfortable with, and again, why we do what we do. It actually is a really neat exercise to do that, if you're in the tractor and you're doing a production practice, think for a minute, why am I doing this? Why have I done this for 5 years, for 10 years, for 20 years, whatever the reason may be? Can you answer that honestly? I think that's some of the exercise you needed to do to be able to be better prepared for those tougher conversations. Now, I talked about earlier, what's in a word, having these conversations in your head or with other people and thinking through the words that you use. This comes from PETA, and I use it for the purpose of, describing adjectives. Piglets are torn from their distraught mothers after just a few weeks. Just a few weeks. Their tails are chopped off, and the ends of their teeth are snipped off with pliers. So there you're starting to build in adjectives that people can visualize. They don't necessarily know the tools that would be used to chop off a tail, but think about snipped off with pliers. They can just imagine themselves doing it that way. And males are castrated. There's not really a description from that because people can't necessarily relate to that. No painkillers are given to ease their suffering. The pigs then this is some of the best adjectives, spend their entire lives in extremely crowded pens on tiny slabs of filthy concrete. What words do you use to describe your production practices? Think through that some of the words that we often use in the agriculture industry that are quite common and quite okay are not okay to other people. I use the example, I read an article the first of the week, talking about, just a term of animal byproduct. There's nothing wrong with that product or that as a term, but to a consumer, it doesn't sound good at all. And so, here we've got this discussion that, words that we use all the time don't sit well with the consumer. So when you start, thinking through some of those words, start to think through about, are there other words that you can use to discuss, how a piglet is moved from a sow, how a calf is moved from a cow. Think about, even words that you use when you spray a pesticide or apply a pesticide, whatever that word is, how can you state that so that a consumer actually, can bring about in their own mind that positive image? Because obviously some of these groups are using words to do the same thing, just obviously bringing about negative side. So realizing that not everyone is going to share your views is an important one. And I've said it a couple of times, but I do want to make mention that we are not going to convert everyone. And even those people that we don't agree with and yell at us, the best response is not to yell back and get mad or, even take negative action. You really almost have to develop a thick skin in the advocacy side of things, realizing that what they deem to be a personal attack, you can't take as such, because inside, and you've known, for generations probably on your farm, what it takes and why there are so many positives in the business. Staying positive is important, and when possible, making those connections that a non-farmer is going to understand. How can they relate to you applying a product on your corn crop to what they might do on their lawn or in their flower bed? Maybe they relate to it, through a quality of product, whatever it may be. How can you actually relate? They cannot relate to you talking about, using Halex with a 90-foot boom in John Deere, whatever the number of the sprayer is. They're not going to understand that. You have to make the connection. You need to be responsible for making that connection. And then, obviously, if the conversation turns hostile, you need to know how you're getting out of part of this advocacy and part of this being part of tough conversations is being proactive, as I mentioned. Don't wait for these conversations to come to you and to, be part of that. Take that time, when you have a minute or make a minute, to be part of this and have a look at this. Here's a couple of pictures from our farm. We've got on one side, it doesn't take more than a minute to walk around from loading the drill up to take a picture of what it is and say, this is a drill, we're planting, soybeans today. Something very simple, something easy. Maybe you can blog about it a little bit later about, why that piece of equipment is important, whatever it may be. But, kind of being proactive and at least being a voice in their mind when they start hearing some of these things. Then you've got, on the other side, here, one of the things we do is we blow chopped straw into, one of our barns that we use for bedding. You stand there anyway, waiting for it to unload. So by the 35th load, you really don't have an excuse that you didn't have 1 minute to take that picture. Think through that as well too. Maybe you're unloading grain at the elevator and you can talk about, how that product is now off of your hands and is going to go to, X number of stages before it hits you as a consumer. Bring that connection to them about why that actually might be important. Use yourself, use people in the things that you use. Here's a couple of young farmers kind of, in their element, in their farms. If you've got kids, people react really well to that idea of, a family farm. And while a lot of what they're told is that corporate interests are taking over and there's more corporate farms than ever before and they're taking over, the reality that we know in the industry is that those corporations are simply owned by the farm family as a way, as business means. So bring back that family element. Why is it important that your family is involved? Why is it important for you to farm? Bring that connection so that people can continue to have that positive impact about, yeah, I do. I can relate to somebody working hard and, trying to support a family. So maybe, I'm gonna follow through with listening to some of those conversations. And then, especially when they can see your face and they can see some of the things you do on a regular basis, the hope then, longer term, that you can achieve is that when negative publicity or negative media or, even questions that they see from school or work or wherever it may be, come to these consumers, they are going to then in turn say, I heard this, but I've also seen it from this farmer. I'm going to go double check and ask this question to the farmer because I'm comfortable. I've built, a trust with them. Even if all I'm doing is following them, I'm taking part in some of that stuff. I'm just going to check. It seems like there's a question there. Get in. Oh, Heather's doing it for me. So I'll let you do that, Heather, when you do see questions. The question comes, how do you actually start by changing the mindset of many farmers who still rather a passive position to all attacks? You know what? The reality is it's the same way. This advocacy stuff is the same way as, certain beliefs are to consumers. We have, farmers that are not interested in going online and having these conversations. That's fine. I think what we need to do, and I'll talk a little bit about it, is how can we get, farmers to be a little bit more involved in things that they are comfortable with. So maybe what I'll do, Margarita, is I'll just leave that question for just in the next few minutes, and then, we can address it then. So here's a couple of pictures from our farm. It's one thing that, I'm quite proud of, and it's something that people, can relate to. They can relate to, or at least they feel good about, a family working together or, kids helping out or whatever it may be. So take that minute, when you're checking cows or whatever you're doing, to pause and, think through, how is a consumer going to be interested in this? And probably, and as I said before, one of the things that it's it's brought me to doing a lot more often is, being mindful of all of the things that we do, that we sometimes can take for granted in the business. And it really, it almost makes you more positive about what you're doing when all you do is talk positive too. It really is important. Keeping in mind, and it's a critical point that I do want to bring up again, is that facts, don't get me wrong, facts are important to discuss, but facts are not the way to win over a consumer. The consumer is interested in, something specific based on their own perceptions. And if their perception is that, GMO studies have been, have had, corporate greed and dirty hands dig into that research, then no matter what kind of research you present with them is not going to fly. They're not going to believe you. So how do you impact that perception versus just spewing facts? So my homework, you've all got homework now to go home with, is very, very simple homework. And this comes back a little bit to your question, Margarita, is the idea that you need in the advocacy world to be doing one thing once a week. This is not hard to do in my mind. Can you pause for a minute and tweet a picture of something that you're doing on the farm, maybe in your business, whatever it may be, being mindful that a consumer, would be interested in that, and what are they interested in? Maybe you make your own YouTube videos. Maybe you want to get into making your YouTube videos. A lot of farmers do not, and that is fine. But what about, watching a YouTube video that you say is, wow, that's a really cool video. Can you move into, more away from kind of that passive position to a more active position by convincing a farmer to simply email that YouTube video to, 10 of their friends that they might find interesting? Do you just share a Facebook update? This is not hard to do at all. That if you're on Facebook already and you see a positive story or a positive picture or a positive video or whatever it may be, hit the share button and pass it on to your friends. We all have friends in our Facebook status or in our Facebook world that know little to nothing about our farm life, or maybe don't know things specific about our sector in farming. Is there an opportunity that all you have to do is hit that share button? It's an article, whatever it is, and pass it on to them. That, in my mind, counts as, starting to be an active advocate. So, maybe, Margarita, the best answer I do have to your question is, how can we make this as easy as it can be for farmers so that they feel comfortable doing it? Maybe you see something in the paper that you don't agree with, or that isn't right, or that you want to support even. The same thing goes for you see a positive article in the newspaper, write a letter to the editor and show your support, or, present some information that maybe counters the article that obviously is trying to lead the reader down a certain road. And if you have questions about how to do that better, there are lots of resources out there to help you, write a better letter to the editor so that it actually could be published sometimes. Can you call a school? I showed you that picture before of that, professor standing in front of a university lecture hall. Maybe it's as simple as, calling your high school and saying, I'm a farmer. I know that, certain classes such as, family studies when we talk about, food, maybe geography when we talk about soil, different subjects that you have, can be impacted by agriculture. I'd like to come in, or I'd offer my help if you need any, to come in and talk to kids or talk to you as a teacher or be a resource to you as a teacher, even if you're just a resource to a school that says, I've got a question about this before I teach the class, that you're there and able to do that. And maybe it's as easy as writing a check. In my mind, I think, one of the things, if you're not comfortable communicating at all, help other people communicate then. It only takes, a few dollars from, quite a few farmers who don't want to do this to be able to have a tremendous impact on organizations that are ready and have the people behind them that are going to start these conversations. And, finally, one of the things that I always like doing is, can you start a conversation with a stranger? And that doesn't mean walking down the sidewalk and stopping a jogger to say that I'd like to talk to you. That won't go well. But, if you're on an airplane, you've got 4 hours to kill. Why not have a conversation for even just 10 or 15 minutes about yourself that leads down the path towards farming and agriculture and all the great things that it offers? Keeping in mind that social media, and even, whether you write it to the letter to the editor or in a classroom, whatever you say, whatever you write, whatever you take a picture of, if it's there, it's hard to take back. So be mindful and take the time to, have that rehearsal in your mind that is going to actually walk you through so that you can be better prepared and the words, the phrases, and you're ready to, have a positive impact on the perception that the consumer has. And finally, it really comes down to simply, doing this. All of this is not hard to do. It just requires you to take a few minutes out of your day or out of your week, and I really am talking only a few minutes, to have a positive impact in this agriculture advocacy world. It's going to be an incredibly important tool that all of us in the industry, not just farmers, we need the help of companies and the reps within those companies and staff and, whatever it may be. We need the whole industry behind this to be able to have some of these conversations and try to be proactive and be preparing ourselves for some of those tough conversations. So with that wraps up kind of the formal part of the presentation. I know we've got a few questions, but so if you do have any questions, please add it to the Q&A section. You see, I believe it's under me somewhere. Certainly, I'd invite anything like that as we do look to wrap this up in the next little bit. I've got to thank you for taking the time to, sit with me and sit with the Ag More Than Ever group and Farm Management Canada through this presentation. We really appreciate your support and, holding out in the technical difficulties that we have. I know that this has been recorded. I've made sure that, when we have stopped, that I've stopped as well until the recording's been going again. So we'll piece all that together and we'll make it available as soon as we can. So again, thank you. If there are questions, by all means, I will sit and wait for them. But in the meantime, if there are not, I'll sit and wait and maybe type out answers if you do have them. But, oh, it's flashing. I don't know if it's flashing on me. I don't know if that's a question or good. Oh, well, thank you very much for taking the time for being here this afternoon. We really do appreciate it. I'll just sit tight here maybe and finish my milk here while I do sit and see if there are any more questions. If you do, I should actually post up this last slide. There are some of the ways that you can find me on social media, whether it be on Twitter, whether it be on Facebook. The other option that you always have is that you can always find me via email, andrew@thefreshair.ca. Of course, Marguerite, you're happy to contact me. As I said, you've got the social media links there, and my email is andrew@thefreshair, all one word, .ca. Maybe I'll type that into this box so that all of you have it as well. There, so I put my email into the everyone box, and then what we'll do is we'll open that chat window, and then you can you'll be able to see that and have a look at that. Well, if there are no questions, then I do appreciate it. What I will do is ask you to maybe take a few minutes to answer just a very